It's been 2 years to the day since Nintendo announced that Metroid Prime 4 had restarted development with Retro Studios, the original developers of the Prime trilogy. Without a doubt, Metroid Prime 4 is their biggest project yet, and they are treating it as such. We know this by looking at the incredible slew of talent they've hired, with programmers, artists, and managers who've worked on Halo, God of War, Grand Theft Auto, and many more AAA franchises. That said, it's a huge bummer that we haven't seen anything of this game beyond a title. So when can we expect to see Metroid Prime 4, and what will we see? There's a lot we can theorize just by looking at the current development team, which consists of members new and old, and considering this is not the first Metroid game Retro Studios has worked on, perhaps the development cycles of the Prime trilogy and the Donkey Kong duology can give us a few more hints. So let's start there. The first Metroid Prime game, which took roughly 2.5 years to develop. And when Retro was done with that game, they immediately began work on the sequel, which took almost exactly 2 years to complete. Metroid Prime 3, however, took 3 years, as they were trying to figure out how best to incorporate Wii motion controls. Now that we know it took Retro Studios about 2 to 3 years to develop the games in the Metroid Prime trilogy, this leaves Donkey Kong, with Donkey Kong Country Returns taking 3 years to make and its sequel Tropical Freeze taking another 3 years, with an additional 3-month delay. So there you have it. Retro Studios takes around 2 to 3 years to develop games, so Metroid Prime 4 is just around the corner. They probably even started months before the announcement of their involvement. That settles it. The wait for Metroid Prime 4 is almost over. Okay, let's pump the brakes. There are a few points to consider here. 1. Game development in the 2000s was not nearly as complicated as it is today. Still complicated, don't get me wrong, but back then, most game studios weren't working with HD graphics and complex physics engines. As a result, games were cheaper to make and were coming out faster. That isn't to say games today can't be made in 2 or 3 years, but it's easier to do that for sequels that reuse assets than it is for new IPs or franchises that have been dormant for years. Like Metroid. The length of Metroid Prime 4's development could depend on if Retro Studios is making a brand new game engine and/or they're changing a lot about how the gameplay is going to work. Chances are, if they're making a traditional 3D Metroid Prime game that doesn't add or change much from the original trilogy, it's going to take less time than creating a massive open-world game that redefines what we expect from Metroid. So, if Retro Studios decides to make Metroid Prime 4 a similar experience to the Prime trilogy, not changing much about the conventions of Metroid and making some small improvements, I believe a release date of holiday 2022 could be reasonable. But if the other scenario is that they go full Breath of the Wild and attempt to redefine what makes Metroid Metroid by creating an open world, new gameplay mechanics, and a new game engine built from scratch, that will take a considerable amount of time, ranging between 2023 and 2024 release dates. Waiting that long would be extremely painful, but worth it if we got a genre-defining masterpiece. However, I can't help but scratch my head and wonder what Retro Studios was working on for 5 years before getting Metroid Prime 4. With the exception of the Tropical Freeze Switch port, they haven't released a single game since 2014. There were rumors that they were working on a Star Fox racing game, but that was never confirmed. Either way, it looks like those projects were scrapped in favor of Metroid Prime 4. And now the question remains, when are we finally going to see the game? Not play it, see it. We know that Nintendo tries to refrain from showing off their games more than a year in advance, and we also know that there are exceptions to this rule. And Metroid Prime 4 could be a big exception. The game was announced in 2017 and restarted development a year and a half later. Now that it's been over 2 years since development restarted, maybe Nintendo can provide some kind of an update to quench our thirst for Metroid. Even just a CGI trailer that shows off story elements in Samus's Varia suit would be enough of an appetizer. But if we were to see something of Metroid Prime 4 this year, when would that be? E3 season would be logical, but I'm willing to bet it'll make an appearance at the Game Awards 2021. Simply because it was supposed to be there years ago. During the week of the Game Awards 2018, there were a lot of rumors going around that Metroid Prime 4 would have a world premiere at the show. Needless to say, that didn't happen, and that could be because A, it was probably never going to be there anyway, or B, the game had already restarted development at the time, or was at least planned to be restarted. If there is any credit to those rumors, then maybe Jeff Keighley would want to secure a spot for Metroid Prime 4 at the Game Awards 2021. So thinking about that, maybe we could see the game this year and have it be released 1 or 2 years later after that initial reveal. But what kind of game are we going to get out of this? Well, judging by the new employees Retro Studios has hired over the past 2 years, it looks like we're in for something groundbreaking. We have a video dedicated to spotlighting Retro's newest hires, so you can click the card above to check that out. But to summarize, most of the talent they've hired have come from studios that specialize in big budget, mature rated games with realistic art styles and lots of shooting. Now, this doesn't mean Metroid Prime 4 is going to be a mature rated game with a realistic art style and lots of shooting, but given that it's a Metroid Prime game, assuming all that wouldn't be too far off. Except the M rating, that's a little far-fetched. The most I've taken away from these new hires is that the game is going to be visually striking, potentially the best looking and most realistic looking Nintendo game yet. Retro hired an environment artist from God of War and an art director who worked on Battlefield 5 and Mirror's Edge Catalyst. So, something tells me they're aiming for Metroid Prime 4 to have a stylized realism similar to the original trilogy. While it's awesome to see Retro Studios take in new talent, what about the old talent? The developers and artists who worked on the original Prime trilogy. A lot of them left after the third game wrapped up, including director Mark Pacini. Can we really expect Prime 4 to be as good as any of its predecessors? Well, according to an article on Video Games Chronicle, half of the core team from Prime 3 are still working at Retro Studios. Granted, this article came out in August 2019, so maybe some people left, but it could be safe to assume that most of the people they listed are still at the studio. Heck, Retro even rehired an old level designer, Stephen Dupree, who left for a bit to work on Super Lucky's Tale. Even so, Retro Studios being made up of new developers should not scare you at all. It's important to bring in new blood to bring in fresh ideas. That's what happened with Breath of the Wild, and the results speak for themselves. That and the new hires at Retro have already proven themselves to be talented individuals, and it'll be exciting to see what they bring to Metroid Prime 4. This game has had a rocky development with it being restarted from scratch, but even the first Metroid Prime had a rough development cycle, and it turned out to be one of the best games of all time. So imagine how good Metroid Prime 4 could turn out with a smooth development cycle. So as usual, we will have to wait and see what over 2 years of progress at Retro Studios has amounted to, and hopefully we won't have to wait much longer. Until then, when do you think we will finally get a trailer for Metroid Prime 4, and when do you think it will be released? Let us know in the comment section down below, and be sure to check out the videos on the right for more topics you might be interested in. Until next time, bye.